going to continue straight away here with a very interesting session looking at advancing sustainable construction, the future of bio-based building materials. And to take you through this panel, please welcome to the stage your host, John Dineen, who is Director of Planning, Education and Science at HDR. So, John and your panelists, please take to the stage.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining this session. My name is John Dineen. I'm an architect and the Director of Planning of Education Science at HDR. And so I'm really excited to talk to you about buildings and the materials that go into buildings as we spend most of our time in buildings, maybe 90% of our time is spent in buildings. We don't often think about what goes into the materials that make them up. And so this panel is put together to talk about exactly that process and the opportunity for bio-based materials. So sitting with me here today is Bill DeRoin. He is design principal, design director at HDR. Dr. George Berghorn, he's assistant professor, construction management and research, and director of mass timber at Michigan State University. Meg Bruce, a chief commercial officer for ekoa by Lingrove. And Massimo Gatelli, head of material science at Impact Acoustics. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So let's start with Massimo. Maybe if you could tell us a little bit about your work in bio-based materials, some of the products that you're involved with in the design and manufacture.
Yeah, I'm Massimo Gatelli. I'm working in research and development activity at Impact Acoustic. We are a company that is focused on acoustic solutions, so acoustic panels, acoustic for interior design. And we are now very focused on the developing of material that are bio-based. Our main focus is we use fibers from biomasses like waste from agricultural activity like hemp, cotton linters, sisal plant. And also now we are working with mycelium for building up acoustic panels. So quite a broad range of materials, some we develop by our own, some we are seeking for other partnership and collaborations.
Meg, do you want to talk a little bit about this topic?
Yeah, I can take it from there, obviously. Massimo and I work a little bit in the same space. So I'm Meg Bruce. I'm Chief Commercial Officer for ekoa by Lingrove. We make a flax and bioresin composite for the same space, for interior design primarily. ekoa is flax and bioresins and used primarily instead of traditional materials like plastic is typically used, PVC probably the most largely used material for interior walls and surfacing, that we're trying to provide an alternative so that there is a product that people can specify and use that doesn't force them to make trade-offs in terms of durability, but allows them to have a gorgeous product in their space that's more sustainable.
Wonderful. And George, you have a little different perspective on building materials. You want to share that with us?
Sure. We don't build anything per se or make anything per se. I am the research director for a program at MSU called Mass Timber at MSU, which is a multifaceted group of faculty that are engaged in research, teaching, industry outreach, and communication and policy strategy development around mass timber adoption in Michigan, the Midwest, and the United States. Among our faculty group, we do have biochemists and engineers that are in the product development space. So we do have faculty that are working on primarily lignin-based adhesives, coatings, and foams, and we have some pre-commercialization and commercialization pathways that have been launched inside of that group, and that's really built around supporting the mass timber industry, but also because we're in Michigan, it will surprise no one to know that those products are also being used to support the automotive industry and some of the carbon mandates that are emerging in that ever-globalizing supply chain in auto. I really run more of the research endeavor side of things, and so we're also developing educational products for post-secondary students as well as industry members to bring their level of knowledge about mass timber and mass timber adoption up to a more sustainable level.
Thank you. Meg, let's come back to you. Tell me a little bit about some of the challenges that you face and maybe the scale up or the marketing or adoption of some of these materials.
Sure. Being new is hard for lots and lots of reasons, but being new to anything is hard. Being new to interior design and construction can be especially hard because you're trying to build trust. And building trust takes a lot of time and energy. And one of the last panelists was talking about how you have to meet, you have to meet the performance criteria that need to be met on a job because that's sort of as a table stakes. You have to meet the pricing that needs to be met on a job because that's table stakes. And then you additionally want to bring to the table what is making you special or different, which in our case is sustainability and bio-based materials. There is so much spin and conversation. It is really difficult to break through the amount of noise that is, and I'm very specifically, I happen to be a mechanical engineer, but I feel like there's a lot of chemical engineers around here. A lot of that last conversation went like this. In my space with interior design and architecture, people are really interested in sustainability. They want to do the right thing. They're very passionate about the spaces that they work on and the impact that they can have in those spaces, but it is incredibly challenging. You need a PhD in chemistry. You need to have this incredible amount of knowledge to break through all of the marketing and noise that every single manufacturer in this space is bringing to it because it is a sales tactic, and it's unfortunate. I think we'll talk a little later about how we can kind of decouple the sales and marketing from actual real information and present that with clarity. I think that's the hardest part, is feeling like we're competing on a playing ground as a little new startup that is making something bio-based with these giant billion-dollar corporations that have a ton of energy and resources to throw at marketing materials that make it look like what they're doing is rainbows and unicorns.
George, mass timber is still emerging into some markets. Tell me a little bit about the challenges that you see.
Sure. So first, is anyone in the room from the construction industry? All right, cool. I'm going to risk my membership card here in a minute. Anyone from the forest products industry in the room? Okay, so I worked in those two industries before getting into higher ed. That's how I ended up in mass timber. It's what happens when a guy who worked in construction who has a forestry degree has to find something to do in higher ed, so mass timber was it. But those two industries, and I'll never forget, I got my first professional job in construction in the late 90s, and my grandfather, my 80-year-old grandfather, had been a home builder his whole career, was so excited to find out what I was doing, and when I told him what I was doing, he said, well, that doesn't sound very different from what we were doing 40 or 50 years ago. And so my statement, where I hope I don't lose my membership card, is that the construction industry and the forest products industry have historically been slow to adopt change within the industries because we tend to be risk-averse industries, and we tend to hedge our risk based on tried and true practices and financial certainty around things that we do. So some things that are challenges in mass timber adoption. Education in the space is lacking. There was a lot of education early on through groups like Woodworks that was very heavily focused on architects, which was great. Architects were able to push mass timber projects into fruition, but the GC side and the construction management side did not have that same level of targeted education focused on them. And so there was a lot of uncertainty around projects. Every building project is a unique endeavor, of course. And so oftentimes it was difficult to take the learnings from one project and apply it to the next project directly. I have met with so many general contractors who over the last several years have said, well, I went to a insert blank professional development session and I was told I would have 25% schedule reduction and 20% cost savings on my mass timber project, and those things didn't happen. Why not? Well, let me get my crystal ball out and we can talk about why those things didn't happen, right? Subtrade familiarity, subtrades de-risking their bids into the matrix and how they're hedging their risk. Again, learnings from one project that are difficult to apply to the next because it's a different procurement system, it's a different contractual form, different markets, different labor availability. How hybrid is your structure? Is it 100% timber or is it hybrid between timber and steel? How much steel? Who's putting up your steel? Who's putting up your timber? Is it carpenters or is it iron workers or steel workers? There's so many variables in still what is a relatively small subset of construction projects nationally that finding that level of certainty has been very difficult, and it's been elusive for many folks within the AEC industry that are involved with timber. It's part of the reason why we started the center that we started at MSU and why it has a dual focus on students as well as industry.
Massimo, as head of material science, what are some of the barriers or challenges that you've discovered along the way in developing really kind of pioneering products in this area?
Yeah, I can talk about a couple of different aspects. One is what Meg already put on the table, that is adoption is not so easy. Now, if you talk in the field of construction material, everything is sustainable. Everything become magically in the last 5 years something that is sustainable, something that is recyclable, something that you can use forever. And it's a little bit annoying, frankly, because now it's something that is also difficult because the people is so used to have this starting point that is difficult to put on the table what you really have new to tell to the people. So I think that education is something that is very important. Education at the level that it's reasonable to understand also for people that has another job, another activity. And at the same level, I also am convinced that nobody will buy sustainability for its sake. Sustainability is part of the process, but we need, as a company, to develop something that is at the technical level of performance of materials that the people is using since tens of years. And they are used to work with that material. They are confident with that material. They work well because they are using rock wool or wood wool or mineral wool since 60 or 70 years. So it's difficult to change the perspective, and you need to build trust. It's not so easy, it takes time, but it's still something that is the major activity that we are doing in our company. And this is why I think that also collaboration and cooperation between companies that are working in the field is very useful. We are not doing everything in-house, as I said at the very beginning, because we have not the resources and the competencies to work in different fields. So if we find out people that has our own vision, then why do not work together? Because there is a space. Especially when it comes to acoustic, we can look at this room. There are hundreds of panels on our top. There are panels on the walls. So the market is there, and we need to go in that direction. Second, but very shortly, is also true that when it comes to natural material, bio-based material, the supply chain is something that has to be taken in account since the very inception. Because when it comes and you start to work with hemp or other materials, they are very diffuse, but they are products that are there. And in our case, for example, we do not treat the material. We use the material as it is. We just shorten the fibers and then use the fibers. But if you have not a reliable supply chain, you cannot go to your customer and said, okay, this time is slightly different from the other one. The performances are not as good as the other, or are even better, but it's the same. You cannot change your technical data sheet for any batch of material that you are achieving. So this is the other point. Supply chain, establishment of standard. So all this stuff that are not yet, I think, consolidated in the field of construction material for this kind of products.
Bill, I want to get your input onto this one. As an architect, being involved in the design of multiple projects that include mass timber. Tell me a little bit about that experience and just adoption of that as a new approach.
Sure. So I'll echo a lot of what George said, but as designers, we get excited with a new project. We want to come to a client and say, "Hey, got great news. We're going to be doing a mass timber project for you." And the first thing they usually ask is, "Well, what's it cost?" And so that's been one of the things that we've been working through, and particularly to George's point, that experience on the contracting side I think is really important. When we first did our first project here in Omaha, we saw a cost difference of, from what the contractor communicated to the owner of about 12 to 14% to go as a premium to that wood versus the traditional steel construction. As we've worked with that same contractor over several different projects, we've kind of got them to start, buying into some of that argument on, well, the footings will be a little bit less. When we're evaluating costs, where maybe if we have a 1 hour fire rating, the timber does it, as part of its natural characteristic. We have to, maybe increase the fiber size a little bit, but we're not adding another chemical on top of that. And then if we like the appearance of it, what's the cost of coming back in with a wood ceiling system? So we've seen that then go down to, when we do these one-for-one comparisons, we're now maybe less than 5%, when we're looking at that cost differential. The other thing I'll add, at HDR, we deal with some extremely complex project types. And so, when we think about mass timber application in a commercial office building or a higher ed project, it's, I don't want to say super straightforward, but it's a lot more easily accepted. But then when we get into things like acute care, inpatient facilities, when we start looking at the code impacts and non-combustible construction or infectious disease control, even times where a lot of seeing with clients, their insurance premiums go up with using mass timber. That's where I think we have, more research, more investigative uses, more, we have one of the first acute care hospitals in North America being designed and under construction right now up in Ontario. So I think as that type of, the owner side as well as the contractor side gets the familiarity, I think we will see that increased usage.
Thanks, Bill. I'd like to dig a little bit deeper and almost like a follow-up question to the last one. Tell us a little bit more about how the market has responded and maybe how that market is evolving as a result of these new materials being introduced. Meg, do you want to start that off?
Sure, thanks. I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword because, as Massimo so well put, everything is sustainable now magically because sustainability has become the gate. So you must have at least that story in some way before you can even enter. But what that's done is created a lot of confusion and noise to weed through. So you must be sustainable. We talk a lot at ekoa about sort of strong, stunning, sustainable. So how do we make sure that we're hitting all of those targets? You can't have the conversation if what you're making doesn't do what it needs to do. You can't have the conversation, at least in interior design and architecture, if it's not also very nice to look at. You can't have the conversation if you aren't then sustainable. But the challenge is getting people to education is key, but it's significantly complex. It is a complicated space. So educating around those complexities and helping people to understand what are the things that matter, what are the key metrics. A lot of designers and specifiers become very binary. To all of us in our lives, this is I'm not coming from a judgmental place, believe me. I do the same thing with my nutrition labels and all sorts of things. It's like sort of like, this is bad, then I'll just cut this out and everything else must be good. It's really, really difficult to design and specify from that perspective. So trying to educate around those complexities, but at the same time that we see all of these things are like, yes, everything in the world is now magically sustainable. It's beautiful. Not so. We are seeing companies that are building in clear targets, clear metrics that make it, they attempt to create a structure and a rigor to the environmental claims that people are bringing to bear, but they also create additional complexity because each of those major end user has their own standards and rigor that they're asking you to jump through. And as a small bio-based manufacturer, it can be really challenging to pull the resources together to meet all of that rigor. But of course, it's our primary focus, so we're doing an especially good job at that, but there are other companies who are actually making really sustainable products as well. If it is not their main focus, that can be a challenging rigor to meet.
Thank you, Meg. Massimo, I sense that you might have some additional follow-up on the market and challenges.
Yeah, I agree on that because at the end, when it comes to the market and to the customer, I think that is also something that is a little bit confusing, the fact that there are so many standards that is difficult to compare because I can look at an EPD, then I can look at an LCA, then I can look at the cradle to cradle, then I have declare, then I have so much different and I'm not saying that any one of these is reasonable and add information to your product, but it is really expensive to follow all this kind of standard. And at the end, are always looking at something that is slightly different one to each other, and it's difficult to compare. So at some point, also this kind of vision give a little bit of drawback because it is so complex that at the end, I agree. At some point, someone is black, someone is white, and then you choose, and you have to choose. So this is something that is quite difficult to approach. But at the same time, I really feel that there is so much innovation at the moment. There are so many companies that are doing good in producing new product with very good features that if I look at the market, I think that this will be quite changed in maybe not 5 years because construction and building materials is a quite conservative market. So it takes time to arrive at a big distribution. But still, I see that in 10 years, the market will change quite a lot and will go in the direction on having more sustainable material. And when I mean sustainable, I mean also the capabilities of having something that is reusable at the end of the life, that is not necessarily all bio-based, but at the same time that is possible to take back and to reuse, to reduce the consumption of resources. I think that this is the target that many companies now are doing, and I think that it will change quite a lot in the future.
Thank you. Bill, you want to talk a little bit more about the market? You kind of hinted to that earlier in your last response.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've seen as the industry's advanced, particularly here in the Midwest, we came out of COVID. Our studio hadn't done any mass timber project to date. We had a project that's actually just about 3 blocks west of here. It's 1501 Mike Fahey Street, and it was a developer-led speculative office building project. And the owner that cared about, having a sustainable project, it was designed to, lead certification standards, things like that. But really what they actually came to us with an interest in mass timber, and one of the main reasons was they were really thinking about how the pandemic impacted the workplace market, and what they were really trying to find was a new way of approaching how do we get people back into the workplace, interested in an office environment, and mass timber played into that strategy very, very strongly. Creating a timber structured timber ceiling with the CLT decking environment, playing into amenities like better outdoor access to natural garden space. They really saw that as one of the keys to really increasing that demand back for workplace and office design. And I think it played out a little bit to what we've seen since it's been opened as of last year. Those timber-based spaces are the first ones that were getting leased up by clients and kind of came at a premium. We've seen it also with the School of Architecture down in Lincoln. I think there was a real interest in how do we practice what we preach? If we're educating these students on sustainable design, mass timber design, finding that the building that they're doing that education based out of, it should reflect those values as well. So definitely some increased owner interest, and then I think on our side as architects, like George said, I think we need to stop treating it almost like it's such a special thing. We need to come to clients, say, we'll just do a timber structure and not make it sometimes it doesn't have to be as complex a sales pitch as we make it, as we've kind of seen that cost, barrier decrease.
Thanks, Bill. In the essence of time, I'd like to pivot a little bit and try and imagine the future. What do we see bio-based materials looking like in 10 to 20 years? Like maybe just to explain a little bit about where you see that's going. George, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so in this mass timber space, one of the things we're starting to see now is, today we look at mass timber and say, okay, this is a more sustainable product than concrete or steel. We look at that on its face. But what we're starting to see now is more innovation being driven within the product to make the product itself perform in a more optimized way. And so we're seeing bio-based adhesives that completely replace the fossil fuel based chemical feedstocks to those polyurethane adhesives. So much better carbon performance on the adhesive. The same with coatings and foams. We're looking at different species of wood that can go into the product. We've led some projects at MSU on the use of salvaged lumber, so coming out of demolition and deconstruction projects. We're starting to look at undervalued species getting utilized. So jack pine, for example, we have a big jack pine forest in Michigan. It's very expensive to manage because of a little bird called the Kirtland's warbler. There's not a whole lot of financially viable outtake or offtake for that wood other than chips. $250 an acre to prep that land is not really doing it when all you can sell it for is chips. That's also a very fire-prone part of the state, so we're looking at how better product mixes, better product recipes, in essence, can contribute to sustainability on a broader sense, kind of on a landscape scale. And we're starting to see more of those things. We're seeing more social sustainability discussions coming into play with how mass timber can be used to deploy low-income housing and quickly deploy that housing into areas that are very constrained in terms of available spaces. So I think on my side of the world, I see the bio-based contribution really deepening its inroads into what sustainability means and taking a much deeper dive into that than this kind of superficial place where we are today.
Bill, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say real quick, we've seen similar, we expected industry-wide to continue to increase in growth. I think interesting to be seeing what, a Midwestern application of mass timber looks like, similar to what you were talking about with the birds, and the sandhills, the eastern red cedar is seen as an invasive species, but maybe there's applications for small-scale mass timber applications. We were talking before this about, the increase of potential for research on hardwood-based CLT, so we can maybe tap in more regionally to some of the hardwood-based forests in the upper Midwest. And so definitely see it growing, and even beyond the mass timber. I just had a call this morning with a client about a straw bale-based insulation SIPS panel. So I think we're just seeing more and more market adoption from these types of products.
We may have time for one more. Meg, would you maybe talk a little bit about the future of where we're going with bio-based?
Sure. I'm a huge optimist. I mean, I think there is all this education that needs to happen, but it's so exciting that this education needs to happen. It's a wonderful position to be in. We have lots and lots of new materials coming into play that are actually, able to meet quality criteria for pretty heavy-hitting applications. So I think that as companies, as that trust, Massimo and I have both talked about new materials, it's hard to build. As that trust is built, you get more and more adoption. It's much easier to be the 10th project with someone than the first project with someone. It's much easier to be the 100th after that if you've built that trust. So I think that, all kinds of barriers will reduce over time. Supply chain consistency, cost of bio-based materials and inputs will go down. Availability of, off-take feedstocks and a lot of the things that we need to be very high quality so that we can make a very high quality product. It's really difficult to manage those supply chains to date, but those, as adoption grows, the barriers for those just continue to lower. So I'm super optimistic.
Leo, do you have time for one more? Massimo, do you want to close this out? How do you see the future of bio-based materials in the next 2 decades?
Yes, I agree with Meg. I think that the most the adoption will increase, the most the process will speed up. So I think that at the moment we already are seeing a lot of interest, a lot of potential. We are starting to have good projects, and the more the people will trust in this kind of new material, not only our material, but the material produced by our company, by other companies, then I think that this will grow a lot. I'm not saying that it will replace 100% of the product that we are using now, because this is not even possible. And some of the product are here since a lot of time ago, because they are work well in some conditions. But I think that a part of this substitution will happen quite fast, I would say.
Thank you, Massimo. Thank you to all of you for sharing all of that with us today. I think we're the last session here, staying between us and lunch today. And I don't know if, Leo, do you have anything to close us out? I have another panel. Sorry.